If there are days in a nation's life that split history in two, days from which there is no return, no forgetting, and no going back to normal. For South Africa, one such day was the 21st of March 1960 in a township called Sharpeville. A quiet morning, a hopeful crowd, peaceful protest, and then a shattering eruption of state violence. 69 people killed, 180 injured, most shot in the back while running. Journalist Humphrey Tyler, who witnessed the massacre, later said, "I will never forget it. The police were shooting into a crowd that was running away. People fell like leaves." Sharpeville was not an accident. It was not a misunderstanding. It was the exposed nerve of a system built on domination and fear. Welcome to On the Beaten Track. I'm your host, Rihanna. To understand Sharpeville, we must understand the weight of the past laws, the rise of the Pan-Africanist Congress, the terror simmering within the police, the courage of ordinary residents, and the global earthquake that followed. Let's go back, not simply to the day of the massacre, but to everything that made Sharpeville inevitable. I'm repeating some of this, but this is the backstory. By 1960, apartheid was not merely a set of laws. It was a complete architecture of control with the pass laws, a system of internal passports that dictated every movement of Black South Africans, where they could live, work, sleep, visit, love, and simply exist. The passbook was not just a document, it was permission to live. A Sharpeville resident later explained, "Your life was in that little book. If you lost it, you lost your freedom. If the pass was not stamped correctly, jail. If the employer wrote the wrong date, jail. If a policeman took offense to your tone, jail." By 1960, over 700,000 Africans were arrested each year for pass violations, more than any other crime. This relentless criminalization created daily humiliation. Mothers held up by the police on the way to work, men arrested on lunch breaks, fathers detained simply for walking home too late. Robert Sobukwe, the leader of the Pan-Africanist Congress, called the pass laws the most hated symbol of white oppression in South Africa. The ANC had long opposed passes, but progress was slow. Then a new organization emerged, young, impatient, intellectually sharp, the Pan-Africanist Congress of Azania. Led by Sobukwe, they decided the symbolic protests were no longer enough. The time had come for direct confrontation, peaceful but uncompromising, and the pass law became their battlefield. The PAC designed a national anti-pass campaign for the 21st of March 1960. The idea was strategically brilliant. Men would leave their passes at home, they would walk peacefully to police stations, and they would demand to be arrested. The logic was simple. If tens of thousands of people surrender themselves for arrest, the system would collapse under its own weight. Sobukwe wrote in a public letter, "We shall not use violence. Ours is a disciplined and non-violent protest. Only the oppressor will be responsible for any bloodshed." The PAC believed the world would watch. The apartheid government believed no one would care. Both were wrong, but in very different ways. Sharpeville, a township south of Johannesburg near Vanderbijl Park, was chosen as one of the key sites. So why Sharpeville? Because its residents lived under constant pass raids, because police intimidation was severe, because the community was ready, they were tired, they were frustrated, and they were desperate for dignity. In the weeks leading up to the process, PAC organizers held meetings throughout the township. The instructions were crystal clear. No weapons, no violence. We walk with empty hands. The message spread through schools, factories, bus stops, taverns, and churches. A woman from Sharpeville remembered, "We wanted to show them we were human. that we could stand without fear. Sharpeville was already tense before the march. Police had increased raids, men were pulled from their beds at night, and young boys were interrogated, searched, and sometimes beaten. Fear was everywhere, but so was determination. On the 20th of March, PAC organizers did final mobilizing. They were followed, threatened, and in some cases assaulted by the police. One organizer later said, "The police wanted to break our spirit before the march even began." But the opposite happened. People became more resolute. On the morning of the 21st of March, the township awoke early. People stood outside their homes waiting for neighbors, talking quietly. Some were barefoot, some wore their Sunday best, some carried babies on their backs. All carried courage. By 9 a.m., between 5,000 and 7,000 people had gathered. By late morning, estimates ranged between 15,000 and 20,000. They sang freedom songs. They laughed. Many believed the police would simply arrest them and begin negotiations. One teenager recalled, "It felt like a festival. We thought something new was beginning." But the police presence grew rapidly. Armored vehicles circled the crowd. Officers arrived with rifles, carbines, and Sten submachine guns. A low-flying jet plane buzzed overhead, a tactic to terrify the crowd. Journalist Peter Magubane said, "You could feel the fear rise in the air like electricity." Yet the crowd remained unarmed. Children sat on their father's shoulders. Mothers held younger children by the hand. They were peaceful, they were hopeful, and they were tragically exposed. Police tried to disperse the crowd, but PAC leaders insisted they had the right to protest peacefully. The police commander refused to engage. His officers, poorly trained and visibly shaken, argued amongst themselves. Eyewitness Humphrey Tyler described them as young, tense, and terrified, clutching their guns with white knuckles. Then came the moment that would be used falsely to justify the massacre. A stone was thrown. Who threw it? Nobody knows. Some say it was a child. Some say it hit an officer lightly. Others insist it landed far short of the police line. What we do know is this: the stone did not threaten anyone. The crowd did not surge. The protesters did not attack. But the police were already wound tight with fear and prejudice. In their minds, any movement was a threat. At 2 p.m., without warning, the police opened fire. No warning shots, not shots into the air, shots directly into the crowd. Some officers fired from the hip, some fired in bursts. Many continued shooting even after people began running. It lasted about 120 seconds, 2 minutes, but enough to write a lifetime of grief. People ran, people screamed. People fell. A survivor remembered, "It sounded like rain, like metal rain falling on our bodies." Another said, "When I turned, the man behind me had no face." Children were trampled as adults tried to shield them. Mothers fell clutching infants. Men collapsed trying to pull friends to safety. When the gunfire stopped, there was a deep silence. Humphrey Tyler described it. Bodies were everywhere as far as you could see. The final count, 69 dead, 180 wounded, most shot in the back. The apartheid government claimed the crowd had charged, but the evidence, photos, bullet trajectories, and witness statements told a clear truth. The police fired on people who were running away, a cold, calculated act of state violence. The massacre was so horrific that even the apartheid authorities panicked. Within hours, police confiscated cameras, journalists were detained, doctors were instructed not to speak, witnesses were threatened, and hospitals were pressured not to release casualty information. The official line was immediate. The crowd attacked the police. The police were forced to shoot. A lie, and a transparent one. Even some white South Africans rejected the propaganda. One Afrikaner resident wrote in a private letter uncovered years later, "If this is our law, then our law is evil." Meanwhile, Sharpeville families walked from morgue to clinic to police station searching for loved ones. One mother recalled, "I went to find my son. They told me to check the bodies outside. He was lying there with his school shirt torn. Grief filled every street. Fear spread through every community, and the apartheid government doubled down." South Africa erupted. Protests exploded across the nation. From Cape Town to Durban, thousands marched in defiance. Police responded with force again and again. The apartheid government then took 3 drastic steps. 1, they declared a state of emergency. Nearly 20,000 people were detained. Townships were placed under military control. They banned the PAC and the ANC. For the first time, the major liberation movements were outlawed. Mandela later said, "After Sharpeville, it became clear that the government would stop at nothing, not even murder, to preserve apartheid." The massacre convinced many activists that peaceful protests was no longer plausible or possible. Sharpeville had changed everything. Photos of the massacre reached London, New York, Accra, and Delhi within days. The front pages declared, "Slaughter in South Africa. Unarmed crowd shot down." The world could no longer pretend apartheid was orderly. The United Nations responded swiftly. The UN Secretary General at that time said, "The events of Sharpeville shook the conscience of humanity." The UN passed its first resolution condemning apartheid, marking the beginning of South Africa's international isolation. The key consequences were: South Africa withdrew from the Commonwealth in 1961. Cultural and academic boycotts grew. Global anti-apartheid movements rapidly expanded. Sports sanctions soon followed. Countries imposed diplomatic and arms restrictions. Sharpeville had torn the mask off apartheid permanently. Behind the newspapers and political debates were thousands of personal stories. Stories of factory workers who joined the protest before their shifts, teenagers skipping schools to march, mothers leaving laundry lines to join friends, PAC organizers risking arrest, young men disciplined in non-violence, and families devastated by loss. One survivor said, "We walked with empty hands. They answered with guns." Another recalled, "I ran back to help a woman who fell. When I lifted her, she was already gone." These stories matter because Sharpeville was not a spontaneous riot. It was a deliberate act of peaceful resistance. Ordinary people stood up in extraordinary times, and history recorded their names in blood. Sharpeville became the line in the sand. After 1960, non-violent resistance ended. Leaders understood that the regime would respond with lethal force to peaceful protests. The liberation struggle militarized. The age of arms struggle had begun. Apartheid lost its legitimacy globally. Sharpeville shattered the illusion that the apartheid was merely a strict governance. A new national memory was born. Sharpeville became a symbol of suffering, resistance, and moral clarity. In democratic South Africa, the 21st of March is now Human Rights Day. To remember, to honor, to teach. Sharpeville stands as one of the darkest days in South African history, but also one of the most important. The people of Sharpeville rose not with weapons, but with conviction. They walked to a police station with empty hands and full hearts. Their courage exposed the brutality of apartheid. Their blood changed the course of history. One survivor later said, "We did not die for passes, we died for freedom." Today we speak of human rights, justice, equality. We speak the same language. shaped by the ghosts of Sharpeville. The massacre revealed a painful truth. Freedom is never given. It is taken by those brave enough to demand it. Thank you so much for joining me today. In our next episode, which is our Christmas episode, if I've got my timing right, it will be myself and Mai recording together. And then in the new year, we start off with the person I've been alluding to for the longest time, Robert Sobukwe. The man, you go to Robben Island and they tell you they kept him away from everyone else to the point nobody spoke to him, that he temporarily lost his voice. It really just was a moment for me learning about him. And so I had to learn more. And come with me as I unpack this champion of a nation. Please remember to subscribe, comment, like, just to keep us all above board. And I will see you guys next week. Bye.